Hello YouTube chess lovers and my friends, this is Gunjan here. Welcome to the 19th episode of Dirty Chess Tricks. In this episode, I'm going to show you a very tricky way to play against an opening called Sniper. Now, no matter you are a d4 player or e4 player, you should have a good repertoire against this opening because from last 1 year or so, this opening get a tremendous popularity, especially at the club level. Okay, here white start with the move d4, and after the move g6, white play the move e4, and after the move bishop to g7, my recommendation is you play the move knight to c3. Now the pure sniper move here is c5, and that's we are going to look in detail. But before looking at it, if your opponent plays moves such as d6, which likely to be transposed into the puck or the modern defense, then my own recommendation is, in my past, I have created a lecture called Chess Trap 5 against the puck and the modern defense, where I recommended a 150 attack, which arises after the move ordered bishop to e3, queen to d2, castle on the queen side, and then white launch a devastation on black king side via the move h4, h5. And I think it's a very fun and attacking way to play against puck and the modern defense. Okay, c5. And this is where exactly many black players get attracted, because what happens in the most of the scenario is white play the move knight to f3, and then black continue with his initiative via the move queen to a5, knight to c6, and putting a lot of pressure on this d4 pawn, and black sees the initiative just early in the opening. So this is exactly we don't want. Here I'm going to recommend you certainly take this pawn. And now, unlike my other dirty chess trick video where we find the tactical solutions, here I'm recommending a very greedy but a very sound approach by white. So what we are going to do is, in most of the lines, we are going to hang on to this pawn with a wonderful position. And even though, let's say in 1 or 2 lines where black get his pawn back, white get tremendous attacking compensation. Okay, now just before we start, I like to show you a plan of campaign by white. So let's say black continue over here with the move knight to c6. So for a time being, black is ignoring his material and try to develop his pieces, where here is the first step. What we are going to do is we play bishop to e3, so protecting the c5 pawn. Here black continue with the move queen to a5, so it has a double hit on the knight. So we are going to defend this with the move queen to d2. Now black get another tempo with the move queen to b4, attacking b2. No problem, we are going to defend with the move rook to b1. And now the second important part, when black plays the move knight to f6, whenever this knight develop on the f6, you are always going to support your e4 pawn with the move f3. So not only supporting the pawn, but we are also stopping knight to g4. Black castle on the king side. Now the third important aspect, most of the cases you are going to develop this bishop on this d3 square, and black here continue with the move rook to d8, white here continue with the move a3 hitting the queen, queen to a5, and now the typical developing move knight to e2. And this is probably the setup you are going to see in most of the scenario, and here is my vital point. In order to free up black's queen side piece development, black has to either move his d pawn or b pawn. And whenever it happens, what we are going to do is we are going to exchange this pawn and remain a pawn up for the rest of the game. So for example, let's say here black continue with the move d5, white took this pawn, and after black recapture and the castle, not only white is a clear pawn up, but white has a bishop pair. And I seriously have a doubt what compensation black is having. Can you spot a one single compensation for black? Well, I'm afraid I can't see it. Okay, before we move on, I like you to put this plan in your head. And in most of the scenario, we are going to stick with this plan. Instead of knight to c6, let's say what happens if your opponent plays knight to a6. Well, same story. First, we are going to capture this knight, giving black a double pawn. Now we are going to play the move knight to e2. So We are not allowing black to cripple our pawns. After queen to a5, we are going to play the move bishop to e3, protecting our pawn. After rook to b8, we are going to protect again with the move rook to b1. After knight to f6, second important point, yep, you play the move f3. And after the castle and v-castle, once again white emerge with a clear-cut pawn up. Third move, knight to f6, which hardly any black player will consider, because after the move e5, black has to play knight to g8 back, as if he play knight to h5, then white will win the piece on the spot. Okay, so let's consider the one of the main moves of the sniper, that is either queen to a5 or bishop captures c3. Now queen to a5, I have created a whole video on this line where I recommended a very tricky approach by white, that is bishop to d2. So if you haven't checked out my video, which is known as Chess Trap 13 against the sniper, then I do recommend you check it, where I have covered this line in detail. I'll just give you a sample line that what kind of fun white can get in this line. That is, let's say when queen captures this pawn, then white is going to play the move knight to d5. And after the usual move such as knight to f6, white has this lethal move bishop to b4. So queen has to safeguard the c7 square. The only square left is queen to c6. Afterwards, white has this shocking move bishop to b5, and black queen is a goner. Only move queen takes, and after knight to c7 we have royal fork. Okay, now let's consider the one of the main move of the sniper, that is bishop captures c3, and after pawn captures, this is where most of the people get afraid, thinking that, oh, white has this triple pawns on c file and black is doing very good. But what they're forgetting is white has an extra pawn, and it's very hard to get these pawns. As I have highlighted over here, black has three different choices. Amongst them, knight to f6 is probably the most critical one, but we should see what happens if black plays other moves. So for example, let's say black continue with the move knight to c6. I think this is probably the most harmless variation. Here, the first step, yes, is bishop to e3, protecting our pawn, our first target. Now black plays over here queen to a5, hitting the pawn. The second important point, we play the move queen to d2, still protecting both the pawns. Now black continue with the move knight to f6. Third important point, yep, you play the move f3. Now if black castles at this point, then white will simply play the move bishop to d3, knight to e2, and remain a solid pawn up. So in this game, black continues with the move b6. So he likes to open up the center immediately. No matter, white continues with the capturing the pawn, and when black recapture, white find out an amazing idea. So what white has played over here is bishop to h6. So not only stopping black to castle on the king side, but white has a very sneaky idea to play the move bishop to g7 and nab the knight. And this is a very model demonstration how to handle these lines. So here black continue with the move knight to e5. So his idea is to play the move d5. No matter, white continue with the move bishop to d3, and after the move d5, he continue with the move bishop to g7, hitting the rook, hitting the knight. Black plays rook to g8, but after bishop captures, pawn captures, knight to e2, d captures e4, bishop captures e4, rook to a7, and castle on the king side. Not only white emerged with pawn advantage, but black has lost his castle right. Now let's look at the second critical reply by black, that is queen to a5. Black is attacking two pawns, but here white has a very amazing attacking reply, that is queen to d4. So not only protecting the pawns, but white is hitting the rook. So black response is force. Black has to play knight to f6. And now you cannot play f3 because black has the move knight to c6. So instead of that, white has a better move, that is queen to b4, hitting the queen. Now I reached this position few times in my games, and there are mainly three replies tried by the black. The first one I want to look at is queen to c7, which is most harmless reply because here white will execute his plan with no problem. So I continue with the move f3, protecting my center. My opponent continued with the move knight to c6. I played queen to e3. So queen is very safe there, no problem. My opponent castle on the king side. I protect my pawn with the move bishop to e3. And now same problem for the black. In order to free up his queen side, he has to move b or the d pawn. And here my opponent continued with the move rook to d8. And after the move bishop to d3, he indeed played the move d5. But this is exactly white wants, because after pawn captures, rook captures, and knight to e2, white emerged with clear pawn advantage. Okay, now what will happen if black plays knight to c6? Well, against this, I'm recommending you should capture this queen, and after knight captures, you just consolidate your pawn with the move bishop to d3. Well, you can play f3, but in this situation, your bishop is not on e3, so I think bishop d3 is more accurate. Okay, the game continues with the move castle on the king side. I continue with the move knight to e2. And now my opponent plays the move b6. I capture the pawn, my opponent recapture. Now this is a recommendation by GM Ron in his Foxy opening. He has only considered the move bishop to e3, saying that black has a compensation after the move d5. Well, that's right, but white is not forced to play the move bishop to e3. Instead of that, white has a better move, that is bishop to g5. So if allowed, then white is going to double the black pawn, and I don't find a single compensation in this line. And I can illustrate this by showing one of my game. Here my opponent continued with the move king to g7. I continue with the move rook to b1, hitting the b6 pawn. My opponent played knight to c6, so he is counter-attacking my a2 pawn. No matter, I defended with the move knight to c1. And now indeed the b6 pawn is hanging. So my opponent has to forcefully play the move rook to b8. Afterwards, I simply play the move f3. And it's a very hard position for black because black is clearly lagging plan, and on top of everything, he is a pawn down. The best reply over here is d6, but after the move bishop to e3, black is about to lose his second pawn. Black continue over here knight to d7, protecting the pawn, but just looking at it, would you be black at this position? Not at all. The simple reason is there is no chance of developing this bishop, and all black pieces are doing is defending, and white is a still pawn up. Well, after few moves, white is managed to win this game, so that shows the potential of this line. The last move black can try over here is queen captures. The only thing black has done is to give us healthy pawns on the queen side. Okay, black can get his pawn back after knight captures e4, but this is the case where black get his pawn back, but white get a tremendous initiative. And let's see this. The most forcing sequence over here is bishop to b2, hitting the rook. And kindly note, knight f6 is not possible because if white wishes, white can give double pawn to the black. So black plays castle on the king side. Now white plays bishop to d3, hitting the knight once again. So black plays d5, protecting the knight. And now the strong move, knight to e2. So idea is to dislodge this knight with the move knight to g3 or knight to c3. Here the black continue with the move knight to c6, hitting the b pawn. White plays a3, and now black get desperate with the move a5. But I think he totally underestimated that he is lagging behind in development. Before I move on, I like you to pause this video and find a continuation where white can clearly press his initiative. Okay, I hope you find this move order, that is f3, hitting the knight. After knight to f6, we are now going to show the black who is the boss over here. So we play the move b5, hitting the knight, and after knight to d8, we play the move a4. So white has get a tremendous space on the queen side, And after the game continuation, that is knight to e6 hitting the c5 pawn, white has this amazing sequence that is bishop captures, pawn captures, c6, pawn captures, pawn captures, bishop to a6, and now the star move, bishop to b4, and white has stamped his extra pawn on the 6th rank of the black. Now if black plays over here knight to c7, then knight to d4 is a very strong reply. In this game, black continue with the move knight to d8, but this is just asking for it. White continue over here with the move knight to f4, hitting the d5 pawn, and it's funny that black cannot defend this. Black continue with the move d4, but after rook to d1, the second pawn falls and in fact the game. Okay, now it's time for look at the most critical reply, that is knight to f6. Against this, I think the best reply over here is you play the move e5. Now if the knight goes back, then the bishop e3 and we continue with our usual plan. So the only critical reply over here is knight to e4, so hitting two spots. And now if you play queen to d4 over here, then I think queen to a5 can equalize for the black. So instead of that, I'm recommending a very sneaky move over here, that is bishop to c4. So white has a very simple threat, that is queen to d5 hitting two spots. Here a few replies has been tried, but the very obvious knight captures c3 is a blunder because of queen to f3 and black is going to lose a piece. You might think, hang on, queen to a5, but here is the answer, that is bishop to d2, and that piece is going down. Black can also play the move knight captures c5, but after the move knight to f3, black has to play very accurately. Now I did this position in one game where my opponent immediately castled on the king side, but instead of that, if he plays moves such as knight to c6 or queen to e5, then I have covered those variations in the PGN. So kindly go through the PGN. Okay, my opponent plays castle on the king side. I continue with the move bishop to h6. He played rook to e8. And now this is the beauty about this line. As this f7 square becomes weaker, I immediately jump on to attack it with the move knight to g5. So here the forced reply is e6. And now another beauty about this line, that is queen to f3. And those dark squares are really weak. Again, the black response is forced. Black has to play queen to e7, and now I simply castle on the king side, and black has a hell of a job to do. My opponent continued with the move knight to c6, hitting the e5. I defended with the move rook to e1. Now he played the move b6, so he wanted to develop his bishop on the b7, but my reply is a very sneaky one. I played queen to f4, and after the move bishop to b7, I give you a few minutes. Can you find white's next reply? Okay, I hope you find this move, that is boom. So this amazing sacrifice is likely going to happen when you have so much attacking potential. Black doesn't have much choices, so black has to accept this piece sacrifice. Afterwards, the simple but very effective move bishop to g5, and black is busted. My opponent tried the move f6. I played bishop captures, and his idea is to play the move queen to f8. So he thinks that he can escape very easily after queen check, but what he missed is my critical reply, rook to e3, and now there is no escape. So more or less over here, queen to a5 is the most common move. Well, here white would love to play queen to d5, but then queen to c3 is spoiling our fun. So instead of that, I'm recommending a stronger move, that is knight to e2. And now black has three different choices. The first one is knight captures c3, because after queen to d2, black loses the piece. And if queen captures c5 at this point, then the simplest is you play queen to d4, and this position, believe it or not, but has a decisive advantage to the white. Let me show you how. So after queen captures and pawn captures, white is threatening to play the move f3 and trapping the knight. The only good reply over here is f6. No matter, we continue with the move f3, and after knight to g5, we can simply capture this pawn. After e captures and knight to c3, not only black cannot castle on the king side, but white has a severe threat of knight to b5 and knight to d5, which black cannot prevent it. So in this game, black continue with the move knight to c6, but after knight to d5, he is about to lose the pawn. In this game, my opponent was 2100 plus rated, so he played the move knight to e6, and after knight to f6, he thought that he can get his pawn back after the move king to f7, which at first sight looks very obvious because your knight is attacked, and if you move that knight, then your d pawn will fall. But luckily for me, I have amazing tactics. Now before I move on, I like you to pause this video and find out a continuation where white is completely winning. Okay, I hope you find this move, that is d5. So hitting both the knights, and the cute point behind it, if the king captures this knight, then after bishop to b2, we are skewering the king and the rook. Knight to d5 doesn't stop it, because after pawn captures knight, we are going to get two pieces. So that was about queen to c5. The final and the most critical move is knight captures c5. But against this, I'm recommending you play the move queen to d5. So creating a pin and attacking f7. So the first reply over here is e6. If your opponent plays the move castle at this point, then this is a blunder move. The simple reason is after bishop to h6 hitting the rook and the move e6, white has this wonderful reply queen to f3. So not only we are hitting the rook, but if the rook moves, then queen to f6 leads to the checkmate. So e6 is forced. After this, I'm recommending you play the move queen to f3. So the typical theme in this line, that is all the dark squares are weak around the black king, and we are going to exploit this with our bishop pair. Now to illustrate this, I like to show you my best game in this line, where my opponent continued with the move knight to c6, hitting the e5 pawn. I played the move bishop to g5. In other words, I'm saying that knight to e5 is not a threat because I can always play the move queen to f6. My opponent responded with the move knight to a4. So pressurizing the c3 square, I continue with the move bishop to f6, hitting the rook. And now there are few choices for the black. If black castles, then this is a blunder, because after the move queen to e3, the queen is coming on h6 with a devastation. And if black captures the e5 pawn, then after queen to f4, knight captures and bishop captures, black is simply exchanged down. So the first reply over here is rook to g8, which is played by my opponent. But now black is really in difficult position because his king will remain in the center. And this is the feature about this game. I continue with the move bishop to b3. My opponent plays knight to c5. I play queen to f4. My opponent captured the piece. I recapture. Now he played the move b6. I castle on the king side, and after the move bishop to a6, I played the move c4. So completely blocking that bishop. My opponent plays bishop to b7. I played rook to d1. He played queen to c5. So at first sight it looks like nothing is happening, but can you believe, in just 4 moves black resigned. I wonder if you can spot those moves. Okay, I hope you find this continuation, that is queen to d2, hitting the d7 pawn. So black has to forcefully defend it with the move bishop to c8. And now this amazing move, knight to c3, with a very simple idea. So knight wants to reach to the d6 square with a mate. And in fact, there is no stopping. Black responds with the move a6. but after knight to e4 he realized that if he moves the queen, then there will be a mate. That's it guys. I hope with this brief analysis you are now confident enough to meet this tricky sniper opening. Remember the plan which I have suggested throughout the video, and I think it will serve you very well. The setup I have recommended in this video is very easy to understand, easy to play, and the most important part is it not only gives white a great deal of advantage, but it completely snaffle sniper attacking ideas. Feel free to like, subscribe and comment on my video, and I'll meet you in my next lecture very soon. Bye and take care. But white has a very good reply, which is taking the pawn and calling the black bluff. And of course black will take the pawn, so bishop takes b2, and the big asset from the black perspective is black has the open f file, and in some cases there are nasty sacrifices are looming. There are two good resources in the Blumenfeld Gambit.